Welcome back to Recruiting Blitz. As always, I'm Tim Verghese. Appreciate you guys tuning in. Before we get started, be sure to like this video, subscribe to our channel. We're diving into the Junior Day. Nebraska's got Junior Day here coming up this week, Feb 1st. This weekend, first big visit weekend of the 2025, or for the, in terms of high school recruiting, first big recruiting weekend of the 2025 calendar year. It's a pretty big one. Junior Day last year kind of helped set off, Nebraska's 2025 class was a good jumping off point, gives you an idea of who the top targets are this year, and kind of moving forward. Nebraska's not treating this as like an open invite to a bunch of juniors across the country. It's more so just the elite top targets. So we'll dive right into it. Just got notable names expected in town. I think this list is going to grow through the week. So stay tuned to InsideNebraska.com for some updates as visit plans get finalized, and as guys set up flights and travel plans, because there's a couple of names that have told me they're hoping to be in town, but don't want me to report just yet, just off of uncertainty on whether they're for sure making it or not. But we'll dive right into it. Just some names in town, and then we'll close off with a quick transfer note here. But we'll start off with some names. Dayton Raiola, Nebraska's 2026 quarterback commit. He'll be back in town helping peer recruit. Big visit for him, and honestly, it's more than anything, it's a big peer recruiting opportunity, but it's also an opportunity for him to get comfortable with the coaching staff. There's been an offensive coordinator change, obviously. I don't really know right now what Dayton's relationship with Dana Holgorsen is right now. Obviously, he's got a unique relationship with the program than most, recruits, just because of his brother and the family, relationships around the program. Obviously, his older sister's on the recruiting staff, and, his dad's always around the program. Brother's obviously the quarterback. So there's a lot there, but this is a good opportunity for him to kind of continue developing his relationships with the staff, and to help peer recruit. There's going to be a good group of offensive linemen, good group of receivers in town. On that note, Kelvin Obot, OBOT, from Fruitland, Idaho, is a fast rising offensive tackle prospect. Has interest from Tennessee and USC, Oregon, Boise State. Obviously, is the in-state program, and so on and so forth. But Nebraska right in there. Nebraska had him in town for the Wisconsin game back in November. He actually not only took in that Nebraska win over Wisconsin on the football field. He quickly made it across the street to Devin to go see Nebraska beat Wisconsin in volleyball. So got to take in two kind of unique crowds, and unique, got to experience the Nebraska fan base. And that really stuck with him, and that's continued to stick with him. And now he's set to come back to Nebraska here this weekend. He's excited about that trip. I would say behind Jackson Cantwell. I would argue, Kelvin's kind of getting up there as that very next offensive tackle target. There's a couple names in there too. Another one that's going to be in town, Claude Mpouma out of Chicago. He played at Chicago. He played at Phillips Academy last season. He's transferring out to Mount Carmel this year, more of a football powerhouse out there. And he's going to be back in town too. And Mpuma's a guy that we currently have graded as a 3-star. I think when it's all said and done, he's going to be a 4-star, and maybe even on that 5-star territory. I think he's a legit, 6'7", maybe even 6'8" at this point, plus 300 pounds. Blew up this past season after kind of his first real season playing football this past fall. At Phillips Academy, and really started to pick up some attention from national powers. He's got Michigan State in the mix, Nebraska in the mix, Auburn in the mix. There was a point where we heard Auburn was trying to finish this off, in December. Was trying to, from an NIL standpoint, just put this recruitment out of reach. That hasn't happened, obviously. Claude's going to be back in Nebraska this weekend. So those are two important visits, both Kelvin Obot and Claude Mpouma. Two top offensive tackle targets. I'd argue, again, behind Jackson Cantwell, you'd put those two right behind them on the offensive tackle big board list, for Donovan Raiola. And I think both those guys can stick at offensive tackle. Kelvin, closer to 6'5", has a little positional versatility, could play inside, but you like the tape outside. You like, kind of the long-term potential of him as an offensive tackle. And yeah, again, Nebraska, obviously still in it for Jackson Cantwell, do want their shot at the 5-star number one player in the country. But they're doing a really good job. Donovan Raiola is doing a really good job of lining up some top tier options behind Cantwell and ensuring that Nebraska is addressing the line moving forward, is building up depth and top end talent on the line. And so these are two important visits this weekend. Not expecting anything imminent from either of those guys, but it's a good opportunity to continue to earn some staying power and continue to trend up with both those guys. I think this visit. After this visit, the hope is for both that they're able to schedule official visits and get back to Nebraska at some point, either later this spring or in the summer. Either way, I think Nebraska's the plan is to get them both in town this weekend and help them schedule return visits for later this year. A couple other important visits in town. A couple guys from South Florida. We've mentioned him a couple times here. Jordan Campbell, the 4-star Miami commit, outside linebacker from Carroll City, also in Miami. So he's committed to his hometown program. Has been committed since 2023, so he's a long-time Miami commit. But he's starting to explore some national options. Nebraska's in that mix. Oregon's in that mix. He mentioned to me this month that he wants to make official visits to both Nebraska and Oregon and a couple other programs in addition to hometown Miami. But Matt Rule and John Butler both stopped by his program last week. And coming out of that visit, I kind of exchanged some texts with them on how that visit went. Getting to meet with Butler, getting to meet with Rule, and it went far enough, and it made such an impact that he instead of he's going to make that official visit later this year, but he's going to make it up to Nebraska sooner than expected. He'll be up here this weekend for Junior Day. He's excited about the visit, his first opportunity to see Nebraska. If you recall, I mentioned Campbell a couple of times in the fall back in September because he tried multiple weeks to schedule a visit to Nebraska. Ultimately didn't come through, wasn't able to make it up to Nebraska. So this will be his first time in Lincoln, his first time kind of seeing everything that the program has to offer, getting to sit down with some of the coaching staff, getting to meet with the guys. He was able to meet with not just Matt Rule and John Butler last week, but Philip Simpson stopped through to see him the week before. So again, if it's not clear by now, Campbell's a top priority for Nebraska and specifically the defensive staff as they look, for top end talent from South Florida to kind of round out that group. I think the fact that Vincent Shavers did what he did as a freshman, and is such a focal point of Nebraska's defense is having an effect on Campbell and some defenders out in South Florida, Campbell among them. So we'll see what happens this week. I think, with Campbell, the goal this week with him and Nebraska is again to just keep building that momentum. The goal isn't here to try and get him to decommit from Miami this weekend. I think this is one of those recruitments. You kind of have to play your cards right, and you have to kind of bide your time. I think summer is the time where you try to make a real move and try and get him to flip. Those official visits are going to be that time where you try to get him to move off his commitment. Or make a decision. But for now, it's you don't want him to make a decision too early because those summer official visits are still going to happen. Um, on that note, just talking South Florida guys, Nebraska is also going to host Devin Jackson, a 4-star safety, committed to Florida. He's been committed since the summer. He committed in July to the Gators. Was an early 2026 commitment for them. Jackson and his teammate Danny Odem, both from Orlando First Academy. Odem's a 3-star athlete, plays receiver, also plays defensive back. Nebraska's recruiting both those guys on the defensive side of the ball. Jackson led his team in tackles this past season. Odem was third on the team in tackles this year with 44. Jackson had 80, if you can believe that, from the safety position this season. Both those guys making it up to Nebraska for the first time. They had multiple members of the coaching staff stop through. I think here, both Orlando guys, this is an Addison Williams recruit. Both these guys are Addison Williams recruits. Addison Williams, obviously Nebraska's new secondary coach. Was coaching at UCF, was recruiting both these guys at UCF, now recruiting both these guys to Nebraska. He's going to have an opportunity to host both these guys, try and make an impact with them, try and, get them to, for Jackson, it's kind of get him to move off his Florida commitment. With Odom, it's just trying to make an impression and show both those guys that, they can leave the state of Florida, come to the Big Ten and play competitive football, play against some of the best in the country. And also kind of showcase the environment, showcase, kind of what Nebraska has to offer. This is a feel-out visit for both these guys, both of them learning about Nebraska for the first time. Have good relationships with Addison Williams, but kind of want to see it for themselves. So we'll see what happens. I think it'll be an important weekend for both those guys. We've mentioned Lincoln Watkins a couple of times here, the 4-star tight end out of Port Huron, Northern out of Michigan. Watkins making his first visit to Nebraska since getting offered early this month. Again, it's early enough in the week that I don't really think I'd say this, I guess the best way to put this. I think there's a chance Nebraska lands a commit or two coming out of junior day. I think they have an opportunity here to kind of close with some top targets. I think one they could make a very quick move with is Watkins. Since offering, he got an in-home visit from Marcus Satterfield. He's been in steady contact with the coaching staff. He's excited to make his first visit down to Lincoln. I think there's a chance that Nebraska comes out of this weekend as far and away the favorite for Watkins, far and away the favorite in that recruitment. And we could even potentially see a decision from him. We'll see if that ultimately happens, but I think there's a very good chance that Nebraska comes out of the weekend feeling good about where they're at with Watkins, and feeling that they can kind of swing on some other tight ends and kind of take some chances on some other tight ends, just because the way this class is shaking out and the way that kind of the national environment's kind of shaking out at the tight end position. They're going to have an opportunity to take two, maybe even three this year. They have a good in-state option in Isaac Jensen. I could see him potentially sneaking into town. He tells me he's not planning a whole lot of visits just because of basketball season, but I could see Jensen potentially sneaking into town if he can make the short trip down. If his Saturday's free, I could just see Nebraska making that happen real quick. But on Watkins, just to make the point, I just think Nebraska has a really good opportunity here, and we'll see what happens. Again, another one. We'll see what happens this weekend. Speaking of guys, Nebraska could potentially close with two familiar targets that have been to campus a couple of times. Kasen Thomas out of Sioux City, Bishop Heelan, three-star linebacker, is a top target for Rob Dvorak at inside linebacker. And has Wisconsin, has Iowa, has Iowa State, Illinois, so on and so forth, recruiting him. Michigan's, kind of in that mix too right now. But Nebraska's right in there. He visited a couple times in 2024. He'll be back for junior day. He's excited to get back down to Lincoln. Again, this is one Nebraska's got to battle the Iowas of the world, the Wisconsins of the world. They've got their work cut out for them, but they've done a good job making an early impression. This is one, and more, not this one, but the other linebacker I'm about to mention, Jase Reynolds, in-state linebacker out of Elkhorn North, another top target for Rob Dvorak and Nebraska's defensive staff. I wouldn't be surprised if Nebraska gets a decision from one of these two potentially this weekend. Both of these guys, top targets, have been to Lincoln plenty of times, are very familiar with the defensive staff, very familiar with Rob Dvorak, very familiar with what Lincoln has to offer, what Matt Rhule has to offer. And I think both kind of understand that, clock's ticking. Campbell's going to be Jordan Campbell, a higher ranked prospect is going to be in town. Nebraska's kind of casting a pretty wide net at linebacker, both inside and outside. And I think for both of those guys, it's kind of, hey, in the spring at some point, you guys got to kind of claim your spot in the class, because I think Nebraska's going to try and move quickly like they did in 2025 to try and get up to double-digit commits by the summer, to try and get most of the class in the boat by the end of summer. I think for Nebraska, they'd like to enter the 2025 football season with the majority of their 2026 class secured. And, what that comes, at some point, some of these decisions have to happen. They have 3 commits to date. I think they'd like to get to 10 by May, if they can, and I think they'd like to get to 15 plus by August if they can, and potentially, ideally even 20 plus if possible. So, I think that starts this weekend. I think you start to see that number rise. They'd like to get, I think ideally like to get to 5-6 by the end of February. It could start with Reynolds. It could start with Thomas. It could start with one or both of these guys, just kind of deciding this weekend. So we'll see what happens there. Reynolds, obviously, born and raised Nebraska fan, earned that offer during camp back in June. Is a guy that the staff loves, is like a versatile defender that can play inside linebacker, could grow into an inside linebacker, could play some jack, could play some rover. Just a guy they'd like to have in the class. I think he's a versatile defensive piece and one of 2 in-state targets. I mentioned Isaac Jensen, one of 2 in-state targets with committable Nebraska offers. Closing out kind of this early list of guys expected in town. Ryan Mosley, 3-star wide receiver out of Carrollton, recently earned an offer from Nebraska. I know people see 3-star, they get a little worked up. This is a guy that I think is going to end up being a 4-star when it's all said and done. You look at the offer list, you look at the schools involved: Georgia, Auburn, Ohio State, Clemson, LSU, Kentucky. Practically every SEC program is involved right now. Nebraska's involved. A bunch of Big Ten schools are involved. Clemson involved. Ohio State. He's been to Ohio State a couple times. A big outside receiver, right around 6'4", 200 pounds. Plays at Carrollton with the Colorado quarterback Juju Lewis. Plays alongside some elite talent out there. And it's kind of that stretch the field outside receiver. That one that Nebraska keeps looking for. He's tentatively planning to come in town. Right now he's the only receiver we've got on the list, and even he's a tentative visitor. But we've got a couple other receivers considering visits, could potentially be in town. I wrote up a story over the weekend. Be sure to go read that Inside Nebraska on some new receiver targets Nebraska's in pursuit of. Mosley's among them, and there's a couple others that are keeping a close eye on Nebraska, hoping to make visits here soon. We could see them in town as soon as this weekend. Another receiver, I guess I forgot to mention, in town this weekend, Tylen Fortune, three-star receiver out of Mississippi, kind of a talented, bouncy athlete Nebraska really likes. Um, you know, Plays some basketball, stars on the basketball court out of League Central in Mississippi. He's expected to be in town this weekend. He's an athlete technically. Nebraska likes him at receiver, but he can play some running back. He can play some DB. Can kind of move around a little bit. One of those like versatile athlete types Nebraska's had success with in recent years under Matt Rule. So again, I expect that receiver list to grow. I expect a few more names added to that receiver list. Maybe two, three, potentially more names to that list here before the end of the week. So stay tuned to Inside Nebraska for those updates. We'll be updating that on the Insiders board and at InsideNebraska.com. So stay tuned for that. At the very least, just follow along on Twitter and social media as I'll be posting some updates there. Probably linking back to the board. So, now's a better time than any to go ahead and subscribe so you can get access to some of that insider information. On that note, just wanted to touch real quick on a transfer portal update. Nebraska is going to have, as this video is coming out, Rocco Splendler, interior offensive lineman from Notre Dame on campus. He's played over 1,300 snaps for them, allowed just two sacks. Played a lot of games, started over 20 games for the Fighting Irish. Was not expected to be a starter this year. Was expected to kind of battle for a job, but injuries kind of forced him back into the lineup. He had success, but I kind of think he saw the writing on the wall on what next year would look like. He's a grad transfer, has 1 year left. And he's going to visit Nebraska now. He's coming off an Indiana visit. Indiana's right up there. Michigan's up there too. I kind of dismissed Nebraska's chances early on here when he entered the portal, just because talking to people kind of assumed he was going to go to Indiana or Michigan. But Nebraska's made this a competition and made this really competitive. They've kind of been that new school in the mix. They had a phone call with him over the weekend that went pretty well from talking to sources, and now they're going to get him on campus on Tuesday, and this is going to have to move quick. Even my words here might be outdated by the time this video comes out, just because Nebraska's deadline to enroll for this full-time classes or for the full semester courses in the spring is Tuesday. So they've got to move quick. Jan 28th is the deadline. So they got to move quick. If Spindler, visits and likes it and is good to go, I think it's going to be a quick turnaround of him enrolling and getting a decision done and all of that. So we'll see what happens. But Nebraska's being aggressive and trying to address the offensive line. Spindler's as good as you can get on the interior, in terms of trying to find another interior body, whether that's a guard or a center, or even, a guy that has some swing potential at tackle if needed. That's your guy. Spindler's as good as it gets. Again, you're facing the Michigans and the Indianas of the world for a reason in this recruitment. And we'll see. I think Michigan's going to put up a fight. Michigan would like to get him on campus as well. They're hoping to do that later this week too. So we'll see what happens. That's just something I wanted to close off with before we get out of here. Just an important development there, and we'll see how Nebraska manages numbers. For now they could kind of be a little flexible with NIL, and obviously have to get down to that 105 count. But they are up against that 85-man scholarship limit as well, so they can't really offer a scholarship here. It's going to have to be kind of like an NIL kind of walk-on type situation. If I'm understanding things correctly at this point, the roster is really fluid right now, and I'm not really sure with Deshaun Singleton, for example, coming back for another year. Is that truly on scholarship? Is it kind of like a NIL type hybrid type deal? So we'll see what happens with Rocco Spindler here in the next 24 hours or so. I expect this thing to kind of move quickly if it ends up being Nebraska, and I think if he carries on prolongs a decision a bit, I think the writing on the wall there that it's not going to be writing's going to be on the wall there that's not going to be Nebraska. But on that note, appreciate y'all tuning in. Bit of a quicker episode this week, but we ran through a lot. Again, like I said, be sure to tune into the Inside Nebraska YouTube channel for more updates here later this week. We'll have kind of a rundown on some important visitors as this visitor list continues to grow. At the end of the week and into next week, we'll have an update, in Inside Nebraska or our recruiting blitz as always, coming out of the weekend, coming out of the visitor weekend. On some top targets that were in town, intel coming out of the weekend. So stay tuned for all of that. Stay tuned to the Inside Nebraska, uh, InsideNebraska.com. Sorry, stay tuned to InsideNebraska.com for our updates from this week and as we continue to add more names to the visitor list. And Nebraska's on that special teams coach hunt. We might have some updates this week, next week. I think that announcement's coming here in the next couple of weeks at least. So be sure to tune in for that as well. On that note, appreciate you guys tuning in, and we will be back next week.